studio is a total mess. Anyway, today we're making a face hugger mask. So we're gonna make this from scratch, as you will see. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Eduardo Talbert, this is Monster Tutorials, and today we're gonna make that. So how about we get started, right? All right, let's get the show going. First thing I did is I looked on Google at different images of a face hugger, right? And I found this one was pretty cool because it's laid out with its shape, length, and everything. So I printed it, and then I transferred the measurements to this piece of paper here. Now I'm going to transfer this onto this surface right here to start sculpting. And for the sculpting, I'm using this clay right here, which is moist pottery clay. Any clay will do. I prefer this because it's kind of cheap. Okay. For the sculpting, I'm using this old cutting board. This, I found it somewhere in the garage. It's nice and smooth. I cleaned it up. And since I'm not a really good sculptor, I'm just going to transfer this shape with pencil onto the wood so that we can build up the clay where the picture is. Now that I've traced this here, I'm going to start building it up with clay. So I have the general shape of the face hugger, right? So now I go to the pictures on the internet, like this one, and some of the other ones here on my phone to start making the details of what this should look like. So some parts will have to build up, some will have to carve down, and on we go. But we have a general shape, which is cool. Right, let's keep going. I think that's about as much as I can do with this guy. So I went over it, the gross pieces, then the detail, and then the finishing touches, which you saw in the video. One thing I did is I transferred the sculpture from the wood board right there to this cutting board because it started warping every time I sprayed it with water to keep the sculpture moist. it started like bending, so we need a flat surface to hold the plaster mold, right? So I moved it to this thing. Now we're going to build some walls around it. Let's get started. For that, I got some corrugated plastic. Now there's the list of all the materials in the description below with links. So this is corrugated plastic. We're going to cut some strips. So there's about an inch and a half tall. I'm going to be about twice the height, so maybe like 2 inches tall. So let's cut some strips. I'm using this glue gun. It's like the Mac Daddy of glue guns, but to tack this in place. Now that I've tacked the mold into place with hot glue, I am sealing all the edges to make sure we don't have a leak for the plaster. So I'm just going down the edges. Sealing everything. For this hole, I'm just going to use a piece of duct tape to cover that. That looks great. So now take some petroleum jelly, and I'm going to use this brush and put it all around the surface, around the sculpture. I'm not going to get it on the sculpture, just around it. This is just to make sure that the plaster doesn't stick to this surface. Makes it easier for demolding. This is good and slippery, so now let's do the molding. I have some water there, and so this cheap generic plaster is called Perfect Plaster. There's a link below if you want to find this specific one. And this is just an all-purpose pottery and ceramics plaster. I'm going to put this in very slowly so it saturates real well and doesn't clump. That looks perfect. That is perfectly saturated. You cannot fit any more plaster into this water. I'm going to let it sit for 10 minutes so all the plaster absorbs all the water. That minimizes all your lumps. It's been 10 minutes. I'm going to mix this up. Make sure that it's nice and incorporated. Nice and smooth like pancake batter. Yeah. Perfect. No lumps. Right. So this first coat, I'm going to use a new brush, not the one with the Vaseline. And we're going to brush all over the sculpture to make sure we capture all the details and make sure that no bubbles get trapped in there. Okay, so this part is really important. After that, we can start pouring the plaster a little bit, a little bit faster. But for now, take your time on this first step, this first layer. And I'm tapping it just to make sure it dislodges any bubbles that want to get stuck in between these creases or anything like that. Take your time, but not too much because we're against the clock right here. once that first coat is done, then gently start ladling the plaster all over your form. We're going to cover it all the way, and you will notice how it builds up. Oh, it's nice and warm in my house. I don't know, it's like maybe mid 70s. So this is time to kick in a little bit faster. So it's getting a little thicker, so you can start very gently ladling some of it on top of your sculpture. And it will start building up pretty quick. This next batch is ready. This is kind of gelling up real quick. So next step, I'm going to take some strips of burlap, dip them in here, and carefully lay them on this layer. That'll make the mold way stronger, so it won't be so easy to crack and break. Awesome. Now I'll let this thicken a little bit and start building it up some more. This looks awesome. Let it cure, dry, whatever you call it, harden. They say about an hour. I'm going to leave it overnight, so I'll see you guys in the morning. All right, see ya. And we're back. So I kind of screwed this up a little bit, so it's a lesson for all of us and for me too. I ran out of plaster. I had a little bit left here, and this whole bag used it all, and didn't have enough, but I had enough to cover the whole sculpture. So I hope that it is okay. So if you're watching this video, it's probably because it went okay. But next time, I'll make sure that I have enough plaster for the whole project. But I measure the volume next time to make sure I have enough. But let's start demolding this guy. So these mold walls held really well, so I really like that. Recommend the corrugated plastic with hot glue. I didn't have any leaks. Now, the reason I put this on this cutting board, in case you're wondering, is because since it's plastic, it bends, which helps you kind of release the mold by just giving it a little bend, right? Might see there, didn't even have to put any effort. That plus the Vaseline, the petroleum jelly, did it for us. This looks good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to clean this up, get all this clay out very carefully so we don't mess up any of the detail. I remember somebody at some point asked me if I use any release on the clay. And I don't, and it peels right off, which I will show you as we get further, but it peels right off, leaving the plaster almost perfectly clean. Look at that. See how clean that is? That is nice and clean. This is extremely satisfying. Wow. Nice. This minimizes cleanup, so I recommend this clay and this plaster. They work together very well. Now the trick for a really good cast out of latex is to have a really clean mold, because the mold does two things. One of it is it gives the shape to the latex, obviously, but the second one is that this surface right here is going to suck the moisture out of the liquid latex, leaving just a rubber skin on it, right? So I'm gonna go to the sink. I'm going to, with a very soft like toothbrush, like a baby toothbrush, brush it with water. And that's also to, not only to get rid of some of the clay that is left over, but if you remember, we used petroleum jelly to release this surface. Some of it might have gotten here, right? So we don't want that greasiness because that will block the plaster from absorbing the liquid or the fluid, the moisture out of the liquid latex. So I'm gonna go scrub it with the toothbrush, water, and set it to dry, and I'll see you when this is dry. This guy is dry and nice and clean, right? So no residue from the clay or the petroleum jelly. So we're going to proceed to fill this with latex. Now, if you remember, I was trying to make like a thick level mold, but I ran out of plaster, so now it's all wobble wobble. So I'm going to use the clay from the sculpture. I usually save this clay only for that, otherwise I just throw it away because, as you can see, it's full of stuff, pieces of hot glue, pieces of plaster. So I'm going to use this to level this up so that our latex fills up quite nicely. Do this. Now to fill this out, we can use cheap liquid latex or some of this nice thick mask latex, right? It's not going to be necessarily a mask per se, you know, so you don't need this thicker stuff, right? This is super thick. This you can kind of like paint it. This one you can pour it. So I'm gonna try both. My first cast will be with this cheap stuff. We're basically going to pour it in the mold, fill it up, like almost overfill it, and then let it dwell for, say, about 90 minutes. Nice and warm here. This mold is nice and dry, so it should absorb the moisture pretty quickly, and it should give us a nice thick skin. All right, so crooked. 90 minutes have gone by, so gonna be a little bucket. We're going to drain this, and whatever we recover you can reuse with another cast, so don't throw it away. That is drained. Now we're going to let that cure all the way. So I got a little bit late last night, so I let this cure overnight, but check this out. That is, those flies. That is perfectly cured. It's got that yellowish color of the liquid latex, which I like because that's a good start for the color of this project, right? And it built a nice thick skin. This looks perfect. This is my favorite part, which is unmolding this. So talcum powder, always get the cheap stuff from the dollar store and take a brush and just get it all over. That way this doesn't stick onto itself when you unmold it, because then you would have wasted all your work, because it is near impossible to unstick it. That's perfect. Dump the excess off. And let's do this. The moment we've been waiting for. Here we go. That is awesome. So we trimmed this flashing and we can start painting this. I finished making the wireframe for it, and I used the cheap dollar store or craft store floral wire. to make it, you know, bendable. I'm not going to bend it yet, but we're going to paint it now. So this should be cool, and it should be posable as you need. But right now we need to paint this guy. Right now it's just a pale latex color, but it's a cool base color. So I'm not going to do any base coloring, but I'm going to do like a wash and maybe a couple patterns that I thought would be cool. So I have this airbrush color that I'm going to use without an airbrush. And then some acrylic paints that I'm going to use for this first step. So first thing I'm going to do is a wash. And for that, we're going to basically mix some of this paint with some rubbing alcohol, right, to dilute it. We're going to paint all over this with a sponge brush or something like this. And then we're going to let it dry, and then we're going to take some alcohol again and wipe the excess off. So it's kind of like dry brushing, right, but in reverse. Going to put a few drops there. And plenty of alcohol. This is like a stain, not a paint. All right. Let's take this and just start painting the whole thing with this. And the idea is that all the little crevices will get darker. This will make a great color for a skull or bones, right? Looks like aged bones. That looks good, but I'm going to give it another coat. Make it just a little bit darker. All right, that is looking fantastic. I'm going to take the hair dryer and dry it real quick. Now I'm going to take a little bit of just alcohol, like that. Cutting a little piece of a sponge, the sponge and the alcohol, and start taking just the high parts off. And you'll see it, you'll see the colors jump out. Just rub the top so that you don't get into the nooks and crannies. And here, let me show you. So look at this one right here, right? So if I hit the knuckles very lightly, they start getting a lighter color on top. So now you have three colors. You have the real dark inside the joint, the real light on this highlight, and the middle tone right here. It looks like it was professionally painted. All you did was rub it. Look at that, it's coming to life. That's awesome. All right, I'm gonna dry this with a hair dryer and we go to the next step. For this next step, I have some acrylic colors right here, acrylic paints, a little bit of water to dilute it. I'm just going to paint a pattern on this guy, and that is not necessary. You can finish it whichever way you want. How's that? And this will be much more subtle once we go to the next step. You'll see what I'm talking about. For this next step, I'm taking the cheap Harbor Freight airbrush, and we're going to do about half liquid latex and half water. And we're going to glaze this guy, right? But I'm going to tint the glaze. So this has a natural yellow tint. I'm going to give it a tiny little bit of food coloring to make it kind of like a brown green glaze. So let's do that. I'm going to use a tiny little bit of yellow, green, red, and blue to make like a brown greenish type tint. And I'm not using not even a whole drop of food coloring. I'm using a little bit of a drop on a toothpick, like that. And I'm mixing it with water so that it flows easier through that tiny, tiny little nozzle. See that? That looks good. So now, like I said, about half and half. So the rest will be water. And what we'll do in the garage is just hang it from the tail, and I'll show you, and spray it. Spray a thin coat that glazes this whole thing. Alright, here you go. It looks kind of white, but this will be translucent once it dries. Watch. Alright, check it out. I think that looks awesome. Now, I know that a lot of you guys are not going to go through this whole process of like the sculpting and the molding and the casting. I totally understand. It's like me watching a cooking show. I like to watch people cook, but I never cook. I just go to a restaurant. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a few of these, but blanks. They won't be finished. They won't have a wireframe, nothing. It will be just a latex wiggly thing. And we'll call it FIY, or finish it yourself. And it'll be in my store. It'll be limited quantities because I'm doing them by hand, and I might do 3 pieces or 5 pieces. So check for availability. First come, first serve. If they're sold out, then just check again later, because I'll be adding them more from between now and Halloween. But let's continue with this video. I think this turned out pretty cool. And what I'm going to do is attach it to this mask. Okay, but this temporarily, so I can show you, because I'm going to use this mask for some pictures that I'm going to take. But so I'm going to attach it with twist ties as opposed to like a fabric glue, for example, which will be permanent. What I'm doing is just sliding the twist tie under some of the wire that we glued. There you go. Since we put that wire frame, it lets you bend it around your face. Perfect. Let's try this on. This is what it looks like to use as a cloth face mask, right? But it is articulated or bendable with the wires, so you can use it for other things. You can use it for a mask, or for a prop, or for a pet, you know. So I think that turned out pretty cool. I'm gonna cast a few more, and if you don't follow me on Instagram, you should check it out, because if I cast any different colors or styles or ideas, I will put them there. Or if it's super cool, then I'll make a video. But this is the kind of stuff we do here, so subscribe if you haven't. Give it a like if you like it, right? Share it with your friends. And yeah, that's how we make a face hugger mask. It almost looks lifelike, huh? So my name is Edward.